Welcome back to the conclusion of our study through the book of Habakkuk. The theme throughout this entire study has been the opening cry of the book, "How long, O Lord?" If you've missed previous episodes, be sure to check those out. They're linked in the playlist that this video is a part of. So tap on the title if you're watching this on a phone or a tablet. And in the video description, I have all of the previous episodes linked. This is one of the series that we've done here on the channel that is intended to be used for small groups, but it's not the only one. We have 4 video series here on the channel, and they are also intended for small group use, including a downloadable workbook. So I'm going to link all of those in the video description. They're our flagship course, Bible for the Rest of Us, How to Read and Interpret Scripture, the Bible and Science, Friends or Foes, how do we juggle what we hear in the sciences with what we read in Genesis chapter 1. We have To Know and Be Known, forming a thoughtful Christian sexual ethic that looks at what the Bible says about sexuality. And it's not what to think about sex, but how to think biblically about everything from marriage to divorce to sexual ethics for single people to same-sex and sexual minorities. So we touch on all of that in that course. And then lastly, one of our oldest courses that we've had here on the channel, and you'll see it if you see the video quality because it was recorded well over a decade ago, is Revelation, a guided tour of the apocalypse. And that's where we walk chapter by chapter through the book of Revelation. So if you've done this study as a small group and you're like, well, what are we going to study next? Disciple Dojo has got you covered. And we're able to do all of this because of people who support this ministry financially on a monthly basis. So before we finish this final session, let me just take a minute here. I know nobody likes to see this in YouTube videos and we want to jump right into the teaching, but we really do rely on monthly Dojo donors, people that give $10 a month, $20 a month, some that are able to give $100 a month or more. That is the lifeblood of this ministry. That's how we are able to literally afford the resources that are around me, the lights, the camera, all of the technology, all of it is donor funded. And we do not sell any teaching material at Disciple Dojo. Everything we do is freely available. And we're just trusting that God will bring people across this ministry who are like, I believe in what you're doing and I want to help you do it. So if that's you, we would love to invite you to consider becoming a monthly Dojo donor at whatever dollar amount you're able. I don't see any of that. Our board, our finance director handles that. If you do become a donor, though, send me an email through the contact form on the website. Just shoot me an email with your address and just say, I'm a monthly Dojo donor and I would love to get one of the iron-on patches that we have. And just let me know, do you want a dark one or do you want a light-colored one? I would love to send you one of these just as a thank you. That's all it is just a small thank you because you are very much keeping this ministry going. And that's not lost on me at all or our board members. So, okay, that's out of the way. Let's get right back into Habakkuk. We're in chapter 3. We're going to finish the journey. After Habakkuk has received this vision, remember God says, though it tarries, wait for it. It won't remain back. It will be fulfilled. Habakkuk gets a vision, and part of the vision, I think, there's different thoughts on what constitutes the vision and what is just other stuff that God told Habakkuk. I think the 5 woes are an intricate part of the vision. And then I think the song that Habakkuk writes in response conveys the rest of the vision. First, he received the vision of the coming terrifying Babylonian army. And then in response, I think the vision that God also instills in him is the vision of the mighty conquering warrior storm god Yahweh, the God of Israel, coming from the south to meet that poetic image of an army that Habakkuk had seen. So the 2 triptychs, the 2/3 of the triptychs, the 2 end panels, basically, I think, balance each other out in that way. But it is a song. It has all the markings of a psalm. It uses the refrain Selah. It begins by calling itself a Tehillim, a praise song, a psalm of Habakkuk upon Shigionoth. And we said what Shigionoth means, whether that's a stringed instrument, whether that's like a meter or a tune or something like that. And so that's what Habakkuk ends with, is this praise song. And it's full of imagery, as we looked at in the last session, that has resonances with the Baal epic. the saga of Baal and the imagery, the Canaanite storm god, which also has resonances with the Babylonian god, Marduk, who was the storm god there. So Marduk was like the Babylonian version of Baal. So it brings together Habakkuk's song, just like any good song throughout the ages, ties in cultural images and concepts, but to make a very different point than what the author of the Baal myth or the Enuma Elish or any of these other ancient Near East myths, the point they're trying to make. Habakkuk is making a very, very different point. And so we're going to run back through the psalm just to recap, because it's always good. You never listen to one song one time and then you're like, oh, I'm done. Like, you listen to it over and over. And so the Song of Habakkuk, I think you should listen to it over and over. Let the imagery kind of permeate. But we also remember it's complicated poetically and even textually. There's some questions about what some of the lines mean. So the translation I have on screen, always compare. In the video description below, if you tap the video title, I have linked to two websites that can help you compare translation, Cross Bible and Step Bible. Those are both linked. They're both completely free, and you can pull up and compare numerous different English translations as well as other languages. And that's important, especially for Hebrew poetry, because no one translation can perfectly convey the fullness and all of the imagery that's going on. So read it in different translations. Like take a week and every morning and every night, read Habakkuk chapter 3. It's not very long. Just read it in a different translation. So like in the morning, read it in the ESV. And then in the evening, read it in the RSV. And then the next day, read it in the New American Standard Bible, and then the American Standard Version. And then the next day, the New Living Translation and the Lexham English, or any of them. The more you do that, the more you're going to notice things. It'll raise questions. It'll give new insight. That's just good Bible reading practice anyway, for any book, any passage. So Habakkuk chapter 3, after the introduction to the psalm, it says, God from Teman came, and holiness from the mountains of Paran, Selah. Remember, those are in the south, so this divine warrior is going north to meet the divine warrior from the first chapter. It covers the sky, his majesty, and his praise song fills the land. And radiance, like light it is, horns from his hand he has, and there a concealment of his might. Or the Septuagint, there he put a mighty love of his strength. Before him will go Daber, pestilence, and Resheph, or plague, will go out at his feet. He stands and measures the land. He looks and makes the nations jump. They shatter the everlasting mountains. They cower the hills of old. Ancient pathways are his. Under disaster, I see the tents of Cushan tremble, the tent curtains of the land of Midian. Is it against Naharim Yahweh burns, or against Naharim is your anger, or against Yam your wrath? In both the Baal epic and in Babylonian mythology, those are names or titles of the chaos serpent, the primordial evil that the storm god would have to battle. So that's what Habakkuk is asking. Is it against that, this rival deity? Is that what you're angry with, or what your wrath is stirred up against? For you mount up on horses, your chariots of salvation. Nakedness uncovered is your bow, sworn in rods of Amar. And that was the verse that we looked at in the last session, that very different ways to translate it. Anyway, regardless of where you land there, with rivers, you split the land. They see you. They writhe the mountains. Clouds of water pass over. The abyss gives its voice. High its hands it lifts. Or on high her pomp, or the Greek word fantasia. And by the way, I didn't point this out in the last episode, but this next line is another resonance with things having to do with Baal. Verse 11, sun and moon stand in her lofty domain. And this phrase, lofty domain, this is the Hebrew word zebul. And zebul, it means height or high place. And Baal Zebul was one of the titles of Baal, God of the high place. And of course, by the time of Jesus, good pious Jews didn't want to even acknowledge that title. And so they made up a pun. And instead of using the phrase Baal Zebul to describe the sort of chief deity in the pagan pantheon, they changed it from Zebul, height, to Zebub, which means fly or gnat. And so Baal Zebub means Lord of the flies. It was like a slight against Baal Zebul, Lord of the heights. So it just shows you another element of polemical theology, like using ridicule for these gods that were so revered in the ancient world. We worship Baal Zebul, and followers of the Lord were like, he worships Beelzebub, Lord of the Flies. You think he's Lord of the Heights, he's Lord of the Flies. So it doesn't convey into English very well, and you could miss that if you're just reading this through in English. So that's why I wanted to point it out. But anyway, verse 11, sun and moon stand in her lofty domain. For light your arrows go, for flash of lightning your spears. So all of this storm imagery that Yahweh, not Beelzebul, but Yahweh is the Lord of. In curse you stride over the land, in anger you tread the nations. You go forth to save your people, to save your Mashiach, your anointed. You smash the head from a household of a wicked one, to lay open from foundation up to neck, Selah. You pierce with his own staff the head of his leaders. They storm to scatter me. They're rejoicing at devouring the afflicted and hiding. You trample upon the sea with your horses, foaming great waters. I hear and my belly trembles. At the sound, my lips quiver. Decay comes upon my bones, and underneath me, I tremble in step. I rest, that is, I wait for a day of distress to come upon a people assaulting us. Or, like we said, if the Tikkun Soferim note, Masoretic note is to be followed, then it's, will you rest? So sort of a challenge to the hearer of the song is, can you rest? With all of this terrifying imagery, it is still God coming forth to save. And so it's still terrifying. It still makes you tremble. There's still fear. But the challenge for Habakkuk that I think the book issues to those of us reading it is can you rest in the midst of that fear, in the midst of that trembling, in the midst of the socio-political upheaval? The world is constantly filled, especially, Habakkuk didn't have Twitter. Habakkuk didn't have a Facebook feed or 24-hour cable news to see all of the awfulness going on in the world. Just what he was seeing was enough to make him think that he's living in tumultuous times. How much more than today for us when we're inundated with just terrible story after terrible story. Everything going on in the world right now, from genocide to war, mass starvation, social upheaval, assassinations. It's overwhelming. And if there's something wrong with us if we're not crying out, how long, O Lord? There's something wrong with us. And that's the cry of Habakkuk. That's the cry of the book. And that's what makes this closing song so powerful, because it doesn't end here. We ended the last session here, but it goes on after verse 16. Habakkuk says, indeed, fig tree doesn't sprout, and there's no produce on the vines. The olive harvest fails, and the fields do not produce food. Flocks split from the fold, and no livestock is in the pen. This is also what it looks like after Babylon comes through and just obliterates any of the city-states that rise up against her. This is an image of utter desolation and destruction. And we know from Habakkuk's peers, from Jeremiah and others, and Ezekiel, it is God's judgment on Israel for Israel's wickedness. And we know from later prophets that God is going to turn and use that same judgment against Babylon, the ones who did this, because they were not innocent either. God uses things for his glory without condoning those things. And in the end, all will be revealed and laid bare on the day of the Lord. But this is about as bleak a picture as you can imagine, Habakkuk 3:17. And then 3:18, one of my other favorite words. So I've said one of my favorite words in the Old Testament is the compound word adana. How long? This is one of my other favorite words. And it's just a conjunction and the first person singular, v'ani, but I. You can translate it, and I, yet I. And it's not a verb. It's emphasizing but I, as opposed to anybody else. But I, v'ani, but I in Yahweh will exalt. I shout for joy in the God of my Yishi. This is from Yeshua. This is the verb, the God of my salvation. Yahweh is my Lord, my strength. So all of this chaos, disaster, ra'ah, is going on around Habakkuk. And God has showed him a vision of what God thinks about it and what God will someday do about it. And that's all. Habakkuk has gotten the vision, and now he is faced with the choice, what do I do with this vision? And this is what he says, I exalt in Yahweh. Everybody else may be clamoring. Everybody else may be fearing, trembling, quaking, turning to other gods, going to other Egypts and Assyrias to try to protect them from this overwhelming nationalistic might of Babylon, this empire that seems indestructible. That's what everybody else may do, but I will exalt in Yahweh. I shout for joy in the God of my salvation. And then beautiful line at the end, Yahweh is my Lord, my strength. And literally is not there. You have to supply this. It's literally Yahweh, my Lord, my strength. And he fixes my feet. The verb seem means to put or to place or to appoint or to make ready. It just means, that's why I think fix is a great word, because it also is similarly flexible. He fixes my feet like deer. And upon bamotai, my heights or my high places, he causes me to tread. Yadrikeni, like makes me go, makes me walk, as a causative sense. And then we know, again, this is a psalm, so it closes with what is usually at the beginning of a lot of psalms. It's bookended at the end, lemnatseach. And this is translated, a lot of translations, as for the leader or for the choir master, the mnatseach. If you want to know why I don't translate this and I just leave it transliterated, see our Psalms playlist here where we walk through the Psalms. We've done about the first 25 Psalms, I think. And we talk at the beginning about what lemnatseach may or may not mean. But then this is similar to how the psalm began, on my gnoth. So maybe my stringed instrument, or, my tune, or whatever. There's just, these are psalm terms, and they're translated in numerous different ways. So in commenting on how Habakkuk ends his song and sort of tying the whole book together, Turner says, previously he chose to lament. That's chapter 1, verses 2 and 4. To question, chapter 1, verses 12 and 13, to just do his duty, chapter 2, verse 1, but given a view of the future, chapter 2, verses 6 through 20, and a fresh glimpse of Yahweh himself, chapter 3, verses 3 and 5, the former complaining and reluctance disappear. At first, fearful silence, verse 16a, gives way to patient and trusting waiting, verse 16b. So fearful silence, I hear and my belly trembles. At the sound my lips quiver. Decay comes upon my bones, and underneath me I tremble in step. That gives way to, I rest for a day of distress to come upon a people assaulting us. And then finally comes a commitment to rejoice actively, verse 18. So remember, chapter 2 ended with a call to hush. That's not the end of the story, though. After the hush, after the waiting, after the vision, after the reassurance, now comes a time to shout. And that's exactly what Habakkuk declares to do in verse 18, as he's staring into the face of desolation, not after God has gotten him out of the desolation. That's huge. The faith to go into the fiery furnace, not just faith when God pulls you out of the fiery furnace. That is biblical prophetic faith. And so Turner goes on, in contrast to the pictures of the wicked, Habakkuk's worshipful rejoicing in 3:18 is not in response to any immediate or tangible benefit or blessing, nor does he put any trust in his own skill or ingenuity. Rather, his trust, his worship, his rejoicing are in the person of Yahweh. In him and him alone, the righteous prophet will be fully satisfied. It's not the circumstances. The circumstances are screaming out, God has abandoned you. God is not listening to you. God is punishing you. God doesn't care about you. That's what the circumstances in verse 17 are conveying. The answer of faith is v'ani, yet I will exalt in the Lord. And this is not just a put on a happy face, turn that frown upside down, make yourself cheer up. It's none of that. Habakkuk is not cheered up. He's still terrified. He's still trembling. His knees are still knocking, but he is choosing ultimately to put his faith in the only one who is trustworthy, even when he can't make sense of it. And that's the powerful beauty of this book. Mirdo Theokoros says, Habakkuk derives his strength from a place beyond life itself. One could say Habakkuk has fulfilled Deuteronomy 8:3 and is no longer living by food alone, but by the words he has received from God's mouth. She goes on to say the awe that he feels after recalling God's mighty interventions in the course of history, all of that Exodus imagery that we see in the song in chapter 3, as a mighty warrior coming to the rescue of the defenseless poor, gives way to an inexplicable sense of rest and quietness as he learns to trust in God's ultimate justice. Remember that quote from Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel: prophetic faith is trust in him in whose presence stillness is a form of understanding. How hard is it for us to be still in the presence of God? How hard is it for us to be still when we're doom scrolling our social media feed? How hard is it for us to be still when we're being inundated with messages intended to generate panic so that you will then keep reading, keep watching, keep clicking, and that will in turn continue to generate revenue for the whole machine that is infotainment? That's what our culture is. How hard is it in that for us to rest, to be still, to trust, and then ultimately to exalt in God, not in our circumstances, not in the blessings of God, but in God himself, the warrior who came from Teman, from the mountains of Paran. So let's lastly talk about verse 19. Yahweh, my Lord, my strength. Okay, that's good. He fixes my feet like deer. Upon my heights, he makes me tread. We usually don't think of deer treading anything. Like deer don't tread out the grain or the grapes or the barley or anything like that. So deer trampling the high places or treading the high places, it's not a natural image unless we're familiar with deer in mountainous regions. I love this image. A deer, to my knowledge, this is not AI. I believe this is an actual photograph, but even if it were AI or photoshopped or anything, this is the image that Habakkuk closes his song with. If you ever watch deer or like if you watch those goats, like goats that climb trees or goats that you'll see them like climb up the side of a dam and they're standing on what looks like nothing in order to eat the grass or the moss or whatever it is, they can do that. Why? Because they have these little hooves. You know, they aren't big. They don't look very impressive. They look like little pointy. I mean, it looks like somebody was drawing and just forgot to draw the feet. Just these little pointy hooves. But what do? They allow mountain goats and mountain deer and deer in rocky places to almost effortlessly navigate the highest dangerous places where we would fall. They can do it with ease. And that's the image that Habakkuk ends with. Yahweh is the one who does this. Yahweh is going, the deer still, the high places are still there. He's still got to navigate it. This deer still has to get across this chasm in this image. God doesn't remove us from having to tread upon the high places. He fixes our feet so that we can. That's an incredible promise. And so, summarizing the book, Turner says, Habakkuk's journey of faith is now complete. He was always a man of faith from the first moment we encountered him. His complaints stemmed from deeply held and biblically sound motives. You know, he was saying, God, I know what things are supposed to be like, and they're not. I know Torah, and it has grown cold. He's calling out, my God, my Lord. He hasn't given up faith. He's coming from a place of faith, but it's faith that is genuinely bewildered. It's like Job. It's faith that doesn't comprehend. But it is faith, and the motives are sound, and God doesn't mind. That's the beauty of Habakkuk. God does not mind being questioned. God does not mind when his people hold him to the standard that he himself lays out in Scripture and says, this is what I'm about. Somehow along the way, we've imbibed the idea that our prayers have to be pious. They have to be proper. They have to be polite. We have to talk to God like we would talk to some worldly diplomat or dignitary or ruler. And there's a fine balance we want to hold. Truth is frequently in the middle of the extremes, and we don't want to devolve into a Jesus is my homeboy, let's just kick it, God. Yeah, you and me. You know, we don't want to bring God down to the level of like one of us in that sense. But we also don't swing to the opposite extreme and become so focused on God's transcendence that we miss his immanence, that we feel like we have to guard God's reputation. He already knows what we're thinking. That's why the Psalms of lament or the Psalms of bewilderment or the voices of the Jobs and the Habakkuk's are so important in the Bible. God already knows it's in our heart. He wants us to express it to him. That's the difference. Job's friends talked about God to Job. Job talked to God. And in the end, Job is the only one of whom it was said, he has spoken rightly of me. God wants us to approach him and to have that childlike trust and faith and childlike temper tantrum when we need to. Sometimes we just need to yell. Sometimes we just need to cry. Sometimes we just need to say, God, I don't understand this. You're seemingly doing things that go against what you have said you're all about. What's going on? I can't make sense of this. That's okay. Those are prayers that God welcomes when they're done from a desire to have intimacy and closeness with God, not a desire to make God have to prove himself by our standard of how a good and proper God should act. Makes all the difference in the world. So Turner says, admirably, rather than giving up on God, either personally or professionally, he pressed on despite the cognitive dissonance he was experiencing. Habakkuk could not imagine there was a bigger picture that could make sense of his limited and shattered perspective. But when Yahweh gave him a glimpse of himself and a word of assurance, though it tarries, wait for it. Habakkuk pondered it, absorbed it, and was thus transformed by it. And here's the key. Despite his unchanging circumstances, Habakkuk came face to face with his unchanging God. Habakkuk's circumstances didn't change. The judgment of Babylon that he saw was going to come. The fig tree was not going to sprout. There wasn't going to be harvest on the vines. Like the livestock would be taken from the fold. Like those things were going to happen, but God was not absent. And so Turner says Habakkuk's final prophetic act is to offer his words and his experience in a book for the people of God themselves to embrace, to chabak. That's one of the possible meanings where the name Habakkuk comes from, is a form of this verb to embrace. And I think it's the most plausible. There's not very many prophetic books that end with a song. Habakkuk does. And it's not a psalm of thanksgiving. It's a psalm of committed trust in the midst of lament. And Maxwell Booth points out lyrics formed in the crucible of suffering tend to resonate across the ages. Think about all the good songs, angsty songs. I grew up listening to The Cure. I'm an 80s kid, and Cure was one of my favorite bands in high school and into college. Their songs come from angst, come from heartbreak, come from wrestling with things. Or think about, like any of them. Think about Adele or Taylor Swift or any of these other like songs that come from severely painful circumstances. Eric Clapton, Tears in Heaven. Like if you look up the backstory from some of these songs, you're just like, oh my gosh, there's a cathartic need to sing our pain sometimes. And it's astounding to me how little that actually happens in churches. Think about worship songs or hymns that you're familiar with. Think about how many of them are just singing out pain, just singing out lament to God. You probably have to think for a while. And the ones that you come up with, it's part of it. Like I think of like Blessed Be Your Name or something like Blessed Be the Name of the Lord. Popular worship song in the early 2000s that was, sung from a place of pain. But I have a hard time thinking of many others. They certainly not to the degree. In the Psalms, 1 out of every 3 songs is pain or lament. That's not the case with Christian worship. And I think we lose something in that when we don't sing our pain. But that's the kind of song. It's not just healing for us. It also provides comfort and assurance and solidarity and empathy and hope for others who are suffering. And that's what Habakkuk has done for 2,600 plus years now. Habakkuk learned to silence his anxious heart by singing in the middle of the story. I love that. Habakkuk, it doesn't end. The story's not over. Like the resolution doesn't happen. There is no resolution in Habakkuk. The resolution is God himself showing up and giving Habakkuk a vision of his nature and who he is and what he desires and the woes that are coming upon not just the empires of the world, but the evildoers of the world, both within and outside of Israel. So the story's not over. It wasn't over for Habakkuk, and it's not over for us. I mean, we know the ending. We know what's going to happen, but we still have to live until it happens. We're in the middle of D-Day, when the Allies landed and pretty much World War II was a done deal, and VE Day, when the war was officially over. There's still that mopping up action, that fighting, that Saving Private Ryaning that needs to happen in the interim, and it can be hellish, and it can be nightmarish, and we can be tempted to think that it's a lost cause, but it's not. And Habakkuk learns this, and he realizes it, and he cherishes it, and he sings about it. So when I taught this earlier this summer on our Grown-Ups Table retreat, which, by the way, that's what today's shirt is, the Grown-Ups Table. This is our community for unmarried Christians. It's all done on Facebook, and it's a way for, as of now, about 5,200 of us all around the world have connected and get together for events, both locally and in our different places, and sometimes all together like we do on our yearly beach retreat. But on the beach retreat is when we taught through Habakkuk together. And the way I ended this was by having us not sing it because we don't know the tune and because I'm a terrible singer, but rather having us pray it together antiphonally. So I would read a line and then everybody, it was about 100 of us, everybody would respond. So what we're going to do, this is YouTube, so I can't hear you, but if you're doing this study in a small group, I want to give you a chance. I want to give us a chance to finish this by praying the words of this psalm. So on the screen, I'll read the part in white and I'll pause. And I want you, if you're watching this in a group together, out loud, read responsively and let it sink in. If you're doing this by yourself and you're in a place, maybe you're watching this on your commute or you're listening to podcast form, you can't see the screen or whatever, that's fine. But this is a little, this is for those who are doing this in a group. So I'm going to read out loud the white. You're going to read the parts in bold, and then we're going to wrap it up. Here we go. You ready? God from Teman came. It covers the sky, his majesty. His radiance, it shines like light. Strong rays from his hand, he has them. Before him goes pestilence. He stands and he measures the land. They shatter the everlasting mountains. Ancient pathways are his. In disaster I look, the tents of Cushan tremble. Is it against rivers Yahweh burns? Or against the sea is your wrath? For you mount up on your horses. Drawn and ready is your bow. With rivers you split the land. They see you, they writhe the mountains. The abyss puts forth its thunderous voice. Sun and moon stand in their lofty domain. In curse you stride over the land. You go forth to save your people. You smash the head of the household of the wicked. You split it open from foundation to neck, Selah. You pierce with his own staff the head of its leaders. You trample upon the sea with your horses. I hear and my belly trembles. Decay comes upon my bones. I wait for a day of distress. Though the fig tree doesn't sprout, the olive harvest fails, the flock is split from the fold, yet I, in Yahweh, I exalt. And then all together, Yahweh is my Lord, my strength, and he makes my feet like a deer's, and upon my heights he makes me tread. So now, what about us that are Christians? What do we do with this? Because we have a little more knowledge, we have a little more insight, we have a little more of the story than Habakkuk had. We stand on the other side of the cross. For us, we know who the rider on the white horse is. We know that the Lamb of God who conquers is Jesus the Messiah. when he returns on the ultimate day of the Lord. And I love the way that Christopher Wright, in Hearing the Message of Habakkuk, which again, that's my number one recommendation for a book on Habakkuk, popular level, easy to read. It's absolutely fantastic. I love what Christopher Wright says in noting what Habakkuk sees and the things he balances. Remember, in wrath, remember mercy. God's wrath and God's mercy. These are two things that when Yahweh reveals himself, he reveals himself as a God of mercy, but also a God who does not let sin go unpunished. Christopher Wright says, in the end, this tension is only ultimately resolved on the cross of Christ, where wrath and mercy met. Habakkuk prays earnestly, Lord, in wrath, remember mercy. And God whispers back, I will, Habakkuk, I will. And you have no idea what it will cost me to do so. That's so good. That's so good. So your final discussion time, if you're doing this study as a group, here's your question. I want you to just spend time together discussing this amongst yourselves. What is one thing that has stuck out to you the most through this study of Habakkuk? We're done with this journey through a very little, relatively obscure book tucked away in the minor prophets in the Hebrew Bible, but it's one of my favorite books in the entire Bible. It has become definitely in my top 5, maybe even my top 3. I've fallen in love with Habakkuk, and I hope that through this study, you have too. So that concludes our study of Habakkuk. Thanks for watching. Thanks for sticking in and following through. If you appreciate this study and you want to see more like it, in addition to what we talked about at the beginning, becoming a monthly Dojo donor, another way that you can easily help this channel continue is by subscribing if you haven't already and clicking the bell notification icon when you do, and also sharing Disciple Dojo stuff. Like, we have a massive archive of teaching videos, hundreds, maybe even thousands of hours of free biblical teaching content at this point. So a great way you can help this ministry, doesn't cost you anything, is just watch some of our videos. Share them with people. Send a link to somebody. Hey, this video really spoke to me. What do you think? Just all of that kind of stuff really, really helps online YouTube-based ministries, which is what we are. Also, I will stick a link to the grown-ups table in the video description. If you are unmarried, legally unmarried, not separated, but actually divorced, widowed, or never married, we would love for you to join the community. And, who knows, maybe you come to one of our retreats and hear some future teaching that will make its way into a future video series here on the channel. But anyway, that's it. We come to the end of our journey through Habakkuk. Thanks for watching. Keep reading, keep studying, keep growing, keep gathering as a community, and as always, keep training.